That's the end of the UQ. We now come to the statement. The statement from Kit Malthouse, the Minister responsible.
With permission, sir, I'd like to make a statement about protests. Mr. Speaker, there is widespread anger throughout the country about the disruption, danger and misery caused by so-called climate protesters with their selfish actions. On the 13th, 15th and 17th of September, a group called Insulate Britain staged coordinated sit-down protests on the M25, leading to major traffic delays. They also targeted the wider road network, namely the M1, M3 and M11. Dealing with this involved Surrey Police, Essex Police, Thames Valley Police, Hertfordshire Constabulary, Kent Police and the Metropolitan Police as the lead force. A total of 241 arrests were made across these 3 days. Then on Monday, these groups attempted to block the carriageway at junction 1A of the M25 in Kent, the M25 in Hertfordshire and junction 4 of the A1. Hertfordshire Constabulary were present at both scenes and made 29 arrests. Yesterday, protesters blocked the M25 carriageways between junction 9 and junction 10. Surrey Police arrived on scene within 3 minutes and officers cleared the carriageway quickly. It is clear that the police response times have improved significantly following the first 2 days of protests. The affected forces have dedicated significant resources to spotting protesters and removing them quickly. Mr. Speaker, protest is a right, but it must be balanced against the rights of others to go about their daily lives. The right to protest is not unqualified and does not include the right to endanger others, to intimidate people or to break the law. The events of recent days have crossed this line. As anyone should know, sitting in the road is extremely dangerous both to yourself and to others. Delays caused by protests between the 13th and the 17th of September have cost drivers in excess of £500,000. And this figure does not take into account the knock-on effect for the local road network, for manufacturing businesses, or indeed for those who missed their connections at ports. Previously, Mr. Speaker, the action of Extinction Rebellion, which Insulate Britain is, I understand, an offshoot of, have cost the taxpayer £50 million and diverted valuable police resources. And we have all heard the heartbreaking stories about people not getting the medical treatment they needed and seen people standing by their cars literally crying in frustration at this appallingly stupid and selfish behaviour. We have all had enough, Mr. Speaker. The government has been working very hard to address these concerns. The Home Secretary and I are in constant contact with the police, and we've been crystal clear in our support for their robust and swift enforcement of the law. Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no excuse for this selfish and disruptive behaviour. The irony is that it actually undermines the cause of climate change, as well as creating more traffic and pollution. These protesters live in a free country where they can lobby politicians, stand for election and boot us out of office if they don't like what we do. Mr. Speaker, there is now widespread agreement in this House and across the political spectrum that climate change demands major action. In November, the UK will host a huge international conference where we will discuss and debate these very issues. But we do not change policies or make law in this country through mob rule or being held to ransom. And these people should not suppose for one moment that the public is with them. Mr. Speaker, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill currently under consideration in the other place contains proportionate measures better to enable the police to deal with disruptive protests. By putting public nuisance onto a statutory footing, as recommended by the Independent Law Commission, we will increase the powers available to the police for dealing with this sort of protest. However, the disruption to our transport network is now so harmful and dangerous that we need to take swift action. The Home Office and the Department for Transport have been working closely with National Highways to keep the situation under review and explore options for enabling police to take a more robust approach. With our full support, National Highways has now won an interim injunction to prevent protesters from occupying the M25. As colleagues will know, an injunction is a judicial order made in this case by the High Court, which can either require someone to do something or to refrain from doing something. This injunction prohibits people from blocking, endangering, slowing down, obstructing or otherwise preventing the free flow of traffic on the M25. If they breach the injunction or encourage or help others to do so, people will be held in contempt of court and may be imprisoned or fined. The fine, Mr. Speaker, is unlimited. This should act as a major deterrent and recognising that this law-breaking is serious, with consequences that match the offending. Mr. Speaker, the police should be fighting crime in our neighbourhoods, not chasing activists across busy motorways. That is why we've taken this action now, and we're working with National Highways on obtaining a full injunction later this week. Mr. Speaker, this is a free country, but that freedom, particularly to assemble, speak out and protest, does not come without responsibilities to respect the rights of others and the democratic process. The British people expect us to make decisions in a civilised, democratic manner, and that those who seek to bully or blackmail are sent packing. And so, with some pleasure, Mr. Speaker, that I commend this statement to the House.
Can the Minister Holly Lynch?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement and advanced sight of it. Tackling climate change is the single greatest challenge of our generation, and I trust that the Minister will agree with me in recognition that it must be at the heart of everything we do. We are at a critical moment. In less than 100 days, COP26 will be over, and our chance to keep the planet's warming below 1.5 degrees will have either been grasped or abandoned. Climate protests have ranged from blocking roads to shutting down transport networks in London, with protesters gluing themselves to cars and roads. These are often very dangerous tactics that require a very particular police response. The police have been in an incredibly difficult position. They've at times faced criticism on various fronts, and however, yesterday, as the Minister has already said, we saw Surrey Police arrive on the scene just minutes after their first call, clearing both carriageways incredibly swiftly. Labour is clear that the right to protest is a fundamental freedom, a hard-won democratic tradition that we are deeply proud of. The right to protest is precious, but we must always be clear that protest has to be lawful. Where it is unlawful, we back the police on the front line to make their best operational judgments as how to deal with the issues as they arise on the ground. Our police are not helped by armchair critics of their tactics. We know that the police are having to take dynamic decisions in often dangerous circumstances, and I want to pay tribute to them in the House today. Anyone who has seen the footage from over the weekend of officers having to follow protesters who were rushing onto the motorway in an attempt to keep both them and drivers safe will recognise the bravery that was required. Clearly there is an issue when people who can only be held for 24 hours then return to our motorways, and action has to be required to assist our police in respect of that. This injunction has now been granted by an independent judge to National Highways. That means people can face contempt of court if they breach it and possible imprisonment. I would urge people not to breach the injunction and instead to make their views known in a lawful way through all of the ways that have already been outlined by the Minister. That having been said, I am looking to the Minister now to tell us what resources will be made available to the police to support them, if required, to now make additional arrests. I hope that we can agree that insulation must be a focus of this government's agenda as we move towards tackling this existential crisis. While we can agree on the need to ensure protests, motorists and police officers are safe, the government must do all they can to drive climate change up the agenda, and on this we will hold them to account.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her unequivocal support for the police. It's not always the case in this House that we hear that on all sides, and I'm very grateful to her for that. It's undoubtedly the case that those police forces who've been affected have had to move extremely quickly to deal with these guerrilla tactics, and we are grateful to all of them, as always, for putting themselves often in harm's way for dealing with this issue. I'm also pleased to hear that she recognises that the right to protest is not an unqualified right. We all treasure it. We all know that great advances have been made in our society because of it. But it does have to be done in a framework of respecting the rights of others, and that is what I hope we are encapsulating. A better balance is what I hope we're encapsulating in the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill that's currently going through the House, which I hope she will review perhaps her party's opposition to and possibly support when it returns to this chamber. And finally, just on her issue, Mr. Speaker, of raising climate change, I know and I hope she will share with me an extreme frustration at the damage that this kind of protest does to the cause of climate change. For my own part, Mr. Speaker, as you may know, for well over 20 years now, I've been an advocate of the hydrogen economy. I chaired London Hydrogen for 8 years, fought tooth and nail to equip London with the means to transition from a combustion economy to one driven by electrochemistry for power. And for those of us who've been at that coalface for many years now, It's extremely disheartening to see people literally screaming in frustration and being filled with negativity about the notion of hydrogen, of climate change being a battle that we have to win, but also one that holds out an exciting future for our country. So I'm very pleased that we're getting some consensus on this across the House, and I hope that as we deal with these protests, we can count on that in the future.
Huw Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The real tragedy of these morons on the motorway is that they set the cause of those of us who are trying to advance decarbonisation in the transport system back, and they also put lives at risk. So I welcome the Minister's robust statement. Could I ask him, in the event that these injunctions are not successful, that he will look at legislation, more may be required, perhaps linking fines towards the economic damage that's being caused? Will more action be taken by this House if needs be?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. He is quite right to point to the damage, as I said, that these protesters are doing, not least because what we're learning about many of the leading characters in these protests is that they operate on a do as I say, not as I do basis. And I think we're all, strangely, Mr. Speaker, in the debt of Richard Madeley, who I think has spoken for Britain in interviewing some of these activists over the last few days. On his point about legislation, I know that he will be an enthusiastic supporter of the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill when it returns to this House, not least because, as I say, it contains this measure of putting public nuisance on a statutory footing, where the maximum penalty that can be handed out for the courts will be 10 years for offences that meet that threshold. So that, hopefully, will close this particular loophole. In the meantime, let's hope the injunction works.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is an important right to peaceful protest in this country, but running onto motorways is just dangerous. It puts lives at risk. And so the police and the courts are right to take action to keep people safe. But can I ask the Minister, given obviously the importance of COP26, the importance of action against climate change and the strong feelings that there will be across the country on this, what action is being taken now to make sure that there can be legitimate, safe and peaceful protests or demonstrations around COP26 that don't put lives at risk and that aren't the kinds of dangerous behaviour that we have seen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee for her unequivocal support for the police and for their action that's being taken at the moment. And she is right that we need to do significant work to enable those who wish to make their voices heard during the COP26 to do so. As she will know, there is a very significant public order operation around that particular event. Part of that activity is liaising with the organisers of protests to make sure that they can take place safely, as indeed the vast majority of protests in this country, and we have protests every single day across the United Kingdom, as indeed the vast majority do. But it does require a sense of responsibility, Mr. Speaker, on the part of the protesters, recognising, as I say, that the rest of us have a right to go about our lives unmolested by them, while recognising and seeing the issues that they're trying to highlight into the future. And I'm glad she raised COP26, because that will be the point in time where we can bring the world to this nation and exhibit our ambition for the future, as well as urging others to do more.
Sir Roberts.
I congratulate the government and Highways for taking this action. It's vital that we nip this in the bud. These people are dangerous, and the consequence isn't necessarily those that can see them, it's for those miles back when the traffic comes to an instant halt, who could well be faced with death or injury. Keep up the good work, crack down on this, and let people demonstrate in a safe way, but not on our roads.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm extremely grateful to my honourable friend, and he speaks his usual wisdom about this issue. The knock-on consequences of this kind of traffic disruption are economic but also emotional. We have seen really heart-rending stories of people who've been able to attend to sick or elderly relatives in hospital, been prevented from, who knows, getting to job interviews that might have clinched that bright future for them. There's all sorts of impacts that are brought to bear by this kind of selfish protest. And as I say, at the same time, the great sadness is that it diminishes, not enhances, the enthusiasm for the cause for which these protesters seemingly want to promote, but are, by their actions, damaging.
Wera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to express my support to every single police officer who helps to keep us safe and keep public order, and their safety is essential. But I also understand the side of the protesters who really feel that climate change is a threat to their future. And we must make sure that the fundamental right to protest and assembly is protected. I worry that injunctions such as this will serve to pit the police against protesters. What action is the Minister taking to ensure this injunction does not undermine the principle of policing by consent?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I had hoped that we would reach a consensus across the House, and I know that the possibly relatively small number of Liberal Democrat supporters who were sitting in those traffic jams will have been disappointed by the Honourable Lady's question. This injunction was granted by an independent judiciary. It was a case put by National Highways in front of them that these protesters were causing significant danger both to themselves but also to other motorists. And on that basis, the interim injunction was granted. We will be seeking a final injunction, I think, later this week, at which the wider case will be heard. But this is the way we do things in this country. We do things by the rule of law, by democratic process. We don't do it by being bullied, by being held to ransom, by being blackmailed, frankly, and we certainly don't do it by putting innocent men and women who are just on their way to work, going about their business, to enormous inconvenience, misery and often, sadly, injury.
Philip Hollobone.
And the Minister for his statement and warmly applaud the action he's taking against these eco-maniacs. There's no greater supporter of the police than I, but I have been disturbed at how long it's taken the police to remove some of these protesters, especially in the early protests. I thought it was already an offence to block the Queen's Highway, and I wouldn't want it to be put about that these protesters can only be moved if an injunction is in place, not least because this injunction just covers the M25. It's just the National Highways network around London. It doesn't cover local roads in Northamptonshire, for example. So can we have an assurance from the Police Minister that if these eco-maniacs seek to block more local roads, which in many cases can be just as busy as the M25, the police will take urgent and robust action to remove them from the highway?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He's quite right that this type of protest has caused significant concern across the country for many people who rely on the roads for their livelihood and to get around. As I say, in the Police Crime Courts and Sentencing Bill that's coming, there will be a strengthening of police powers to deal with this issue. There is an offence blocking the highway at the moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, which the police are using to remove those protesters faster and faster. And I'm very grateful to those forces who have upped their game over the last few days to the extent that, as I say, Surrey Police arrived, I think, within 3 minutes of the most recent blockage. But unfortunately, the penalty that attaches to those offences is quite weak, shall we say. It's a level 3 fine, which is up to £1,000. Now, the one thing we do know about these groups is they are well financed. And that this is not proving to be enough of a deterrent, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we hope is that the injunction, the breach of which carries an unlimited fine and possibly up to 2 years in prison, will give us the deterrent we need while we wait for that legislation to appear.
Steve McCabe.
Thank you. I concur with the view that this is grossly dangerous and irresponsible behaviour, and I hope these people will come to their senses. I understand they claim that the purpose is to demonstrate their support for home insulation programmes. Could I suggest to the Minister that he considers that those who are successfully prosecuted receive a sentence which ensures they're put to work, helping to insulate the homes of those less fortunate than themselves?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, what a splendid idea. Not least as I think we learnt from the television this morning that one of the leading organisers group has yet to insulate his own home, despite urging the rest of us to do so. As he will know, the government is investing significant amounts of money, over £1 billion this year alone, on encouraging people to take green measures in their own homes to help us with the fight against climate change. But I think putting some of those individuals towards that effort, more than happy for them to come and have a look at the insulation in my roof, which could always do with some improvement possibly. I think that's a jolly good idea.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents have had their lives hugely disrupted over the last week by the actions of these now so-called morons on the motorway. They are doing more harm than good by creating congestion, impacting air quality and driving up pollution in an area that's already got poor air quality. Does my right honourable friend agree? If we are to meet our net zero commitments, then we need to win the hearts and minds of the whole country to make the changes that are needed. Actions such as this are counterproductive and have seen the potential to divide us on this issue of climate change rather than unite us, which is what we need.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I could not have put it better myself. The honourable gentleman is absolutely right. And I know from his own history that one of the key things we have to do is to engender in the British people the same enthusiasm for science and technology that he has shown in his parliamentary career, because that is the key way that we will solve this challenge of climate change. And this kind of blunt instrument, selfish behaviour, sets that cause back by years.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the government on finally taking action against these hypocritical highway hoodlums who have caused misery to many people across London and the greater area. But does he share my concern that the police seemed in some cases to collaborate with them? I'm the last person to talk about protest because I come from a party of protest, and many a time have been engaged in protest. I've never had a police officer who's come and asked me, am I comfortable, or what can he do to help me to stay in the place where I am? It's usually a case of, you're breaking the law, get out of the road. So can he tell us, since it is likely that these protesters will move to somewhere else where there's not an injunction, what discussions he is having with the police to make sure that the boys in blue don't act on the side of the protesters in green?
Mr. Speaker, boys and increasingly happily girls in blue that we're seeing on the front line. The alliteration is flying this morning, Madam Deputy Speaker, is it not? And I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's support in what we are doing. But I would caution him in drawing any lessons from specific incidences that have been filmed of police officers trying to do their best to handle these protests. The role of the police in this situation, in all protest situations, is fundamentally to enable protest within the law. And while in any one day the police will do thousands of things that go well, and something that then appears on social media may indicate otherwise, I think we need to be careful about drawing wider lessons about the police treatment of people from that. We are in constant contact with Chief Constables concerned, not least with the Metropolitan Police, who are coordinating this action. And if we need to expand our ability to deal with it, then we will do so.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Along with millions of people up and down the country, I absolutely welcome the move taken by my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and my right honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, and it is good to see common sense prevail. Stoke-on-Trent has welcomed nearly £1 million of government funding earlier this year as part of the Green Homes Grant Scheme, which is being distributed to the city's most vulnerable. Will the Minister join me in welcoming the great work Stoke-on-Trent City Council is doing to insulate homes? And does he agree that rather than hindering people from going about their lives, the Insulate Britain protesters should be welcoming the important work being done by this government and councils to insulate homes and cut carbon emissions?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Stoke-on-Trent, Madam Deputy Speaker, apologies. Stoke-on-Trent, soon to be renamed part of the Green Country for the work that it is doing. That is the great tragedy of these protests. That we are making enormous strides in our ambition to reach net zero, investing masses of public money in encouraging people to take up electric vehicles, to frankly insulate their homes, to look at green technologies in the way they run their lives. And that is often being led by local government. So I'm very pleased to offer my support to her and point the British public towards this great work that is being done, and recognise that this is a positive step forward for us, rather than a stick to beat people with, which is what these protesters seem to be doing.
Henry Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker. It was recently a pleasure to meet with constituents as part of the Great Big Green Week, where we had a very fruitful discussion about the challenges of climate change. But I welcome this injunction against irresponsible protest. Will he consider, if necessary, extending or applying to extend the injunction to other pieces of the highways network, such as the M23 that serves my constituency and many important businesses, and not least Gatwick Airport, if that becomes necessary?
Madam Speaker, of course we will, if required. Let us hope that the deterrent effect is enough, but if this protest extends to other part of the motorway network, then we will have to consider our judicial options. As I say, while we await the legislation currently in another place, hopefully emerging unamended, so that we can put this public nuisance offence onto the statute book. And I'm very pleased, Madam Deputy Speaker, that he's engaging with the constituents. You might be interested to know that I, on Friday, had a meeting with representatives of CAFOD in my constituency, who were urging me to follow the words of His Holiness in pursuing our climate change ambitions. And out of that meeting came a pledge from me to hold a Green Summit in my constituency in the next few months, where we would bring people together to discuss what more we can do in beautiful North West Hampshire to make our contribution.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now then, this injunction is welcome news. So does the Minister agree with me that the police should now adopt a zero-tolerance approach? And as soon as one of these morons steps foot on the motorway, they should be carted off in an electric police van and locked up in a fully insulated cell.
Mr. Speaker, as is usually the case in his forthright and direct manner, the honourable gentleman puts his finger on the button. We are now seeing extremely swift action, police arriving on the scene within minutes. He will understand that it is tough for them to patrol the entirety of the motorway network and be there as fast as they can. But sorry, police there in 3 minutes. And I know in Kent, protesters were intercepted before they even got on the carriageway. But where we want our police officers is in our neighbourhoods, isn't it? On our streets fighting crime. We don't want them patrolling the network looking for these people. And hopefully this injunction will mean that they can go back to doing the job we expect of them.
Pauline Latham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend the Minister for his action? It's about time these people learnt that they cannot go about an unpeaceful protest that impacts on so many people's lives going about their daily work. And I'd like to commend my honourable friend from Crawley, who said about his part, the M23, if they set foot there. Could I commend the Minister to look at the M1 and the A1 taking people north, which are crucial to the lifeblood of this country? If we don't keep the traffic moving, we're going to affect the economy. So I commend him for what he's done, but will he please not hesitate to do more if necessary?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are very alive to the possibility of other motorways being affected, and of course, if they are, then we'll take the action that's required. But the Honourable Lady highlights an important point, which is that we as democratic representatives should be the repository of these kind of views. And I'm not aware personally, I will go and check in my own office, but I'm not aware personally that I've been approached by this group to seek any kind of change or acceleration in government policy, and I don't know if anybody else in the House has. That is the way we do things in this country, and hopefully that's the way that we will go back to in the future.
Alexander Stafford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have heard countless occasions where people have been stopped going to GP or hospitals because of these protesters. We all know the NHS is under great strain post-COVID with long waiting lists. What steps can this government take to try and get financial recompense for the NHS from these protesters so the taxpayer isn't fundamentally subsidising these eco-extremists?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman obviously expresses in pithy terms the frustration and indeed the cost there is to wider society of these protests. If only we had some way to recover this cost from those individuals. Sadly, under current legislation, I think that is unlikely. Although it is not beyond the realms of possibility that somebody who was caught up in one of these protests, who missed some commercial opportunities, we say, may wish to consult their lawyers and see whether there might indeed be some method by which they could seek compensation.
James Daly.
Thank
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the steps taken by my right honourable friend and the government to address this very serious issue? But this is not protest. This is deliberate acts by people going out onto the public highway and endangering people's lives. That's a completely different thing to peaceful protest, which we all welcome. So as we all are committed to supporting the Green Agenda, that is a separate issue to people going out and putting people's lives at risk. In line with other questions that have been put to my right honourable friend, will he take every step necessary if these people turn up on the M6, M5 and wherever else, and urge the police to take every action necessary to remove them immediately from the public highway? Somebody will get killed.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the honourable member's support, and as an esteemed officer of the court himself, he will know that we would have, to get an injunction, we would have had made a case exactly as he says, that this is not about protest, it is about safety on the highway, something that we as a government have to make sure that we put first. But yes, if things proceed, if it works, then fine, but if things get worse, then we'll obviously have to consider what more action we have to take.
Final question from Brendan Clarke-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like my right honourable friend, I watched Good Morning Britain this morning with disbelief, seeing an activist who claimed to speak for Insulate Britain, who then admitted he hadn't insulated his own home despite pushing others to do the same. And that's perhaps a level of foolishness I haven't seen on the show since their former presenter left. But can my right honourable friend confirm that these highly disruptive and repeat protests are exactly the kind of measures that our police, crime, sentencing and courts bill seeks to address? And the bill will mean that we don't have to resort to seeking these injunctions in the future.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, again, I'm grateful for my honourable friend's support, and he is absolutely right that following requests from the police, then indeed a report from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary about the balance we need to strike between the rights of protesters and the rights of the rest of us to go about our lives, that these relatively mild measures that we're putting through in the Police, Crime, Courts and Sentencing Bill will give the police much better powers to manage these kind of protests, while at the same time meaning that the vast majority of protests, which are lawful, often important, can take place in an environment in which everybody is safe and the protester's voice can be heard. And I hope that when that legislation returns from the other place, it will receive unequivocal support from across the House, because beyond the measures on protest, Madam Deputy Speaker, it contains important measures to deal with violent crime and to support the most vulnerable in our society.
I thank the Minister for his statement, and we now move on to the 10-minute rule motion. Henry Smith.